Fans of the classic Western television series Gunsmoke have been plagued with one question.
For 20 years, America watched them. Marshal Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty, side by side in every storm, every gunfight, every quiet moment in Dodge City. And their bond was obviously unshakable, so was their chemistry. But the one thing fans waited for never actually happened. Not once. Not ever. So naturally, questions began to arise. Was it a secret feud behind the scenes, or a strict network ban? Or was it something only James Arness could explain, because when he finally spoke about it, what he said changed how we see the show forever. There's a reason you've never seen that moment, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why. If you've ever caught an episode of Gunsmoke, you know there's one thing that's more intense than the shootouts, the standoffs, or even those dusty saloon brawls. And that's the tension between Marshal Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty. The stolen glances, the close calls.
Did Marshal Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty ever kiss?
The way he'd say "Kitty," like he was barely holding something back and America was watching like, "Come on already, kiss the woman." But it never happened. Not once in the show's 20 seasons, and no, you're not remembering wrong. That kiss the whole world wanted to see so bad, it was not hiding in some finale. It simply never existed on screen. So what gives? Were they just slow burning it for 2 decades? Or was something bigger going on behind the scenes? Let's break it down, Hollywood style. The Unspoken Bond. Let's talk about one of the greatest will they won't they stories in television history. Before Ross and Rachel, Jim and Pam, there was Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty. Now, if you're a Gunsmoke fan, you already know exactly what I mean. These two weren't just co-workers in Dodge City. They were the emotional heart of the entire show, and yet, despite all that late-night conversation, all the long looks, and all the tender moments that practically begged for a kiss, it just never happened. Before we delve into details, let's take a moment to really appreciate what these characters meant to each other. Matt Dillon, the Marshal, was all duty, honor, and grit. A man of few words but strong principles, and Miss Kitty Russell was a saloon owner with a spine of steel and a heart of gold. She could hold her own with the rowdiest cowboys and still carry herself with elegance. She wasn't just the girl in the story, she was a force. When the camera cut to Kitty, you paid attention because you felt her presence. Now, when you put those two characters in a room together, sparks didn't just fly, they simmered. The way they looked at each other was quiet, thoughtful, like there was a whole other conversation happening in their eyes. That kind of chemistry can't be faked, and for 20 seasons, fans watched and waited. Was this finally going to be the episode where Matt grabbed Kitty by the hand and finally made his feelings known? Was he going to set down the badge for 5 seconds and just tell her? Spoiler alert, he never did. Still, that never stopped viewers from hoping. Every episode gave just enough to keep people on the hook. A hand held too long, a compliment said a little softer than usual, a walk home under the stars, arms touching just slightly as they walked down that dirt road. Even the way Matt said "Kitty" with this low, careful tone, like the word meant something sacred. And don't even get me started on the scenes where she was in danger. You could see it on his face, the fear, urgency, and something deeper that he never let surface. Kitty, on the other hand, wasn't exactly subtle, but she wasn't pushy either. She'd tease him, challenge him, but she never begged for his love, and that's what made her so magnetic. She was always in control. She ran the long branch, had half the town's respect, and she didn't need a man to complete her. But you just know that deep down, she was waiting for him to finally see what was right in front of him. It was the kind of slow-burn romance that didn't need a single word, just a glance, a pause, and every viewer at home holding their breath, wishing for more. There's this one quote that sums it up perfectly. They flirted, teased, hugged, and walked off with their arms around one another, but they never kissed. But oh, those deep stares. And it's so true. Every movement between them was loaded. You didn't need fireworks when a glance said it all. When he walked into that saloon, her eyes always found him. When he was wounded or troubled, she was the one person who could reach him. No one else came close, and fans picked up on that immediately. It got to a point where viewers wrote letters to CBS, actual handwritten letters, begging for something more between the two. At the peak of the show's popularity, people were obsessed with this relationship, and not just casually shipping them obsessed. We're talking full-on, emotionally invested, screaming at the television levels of commitment. It got to the point where every episode ending without a kiss felt like a cliffhanger. People kept thinking, maybe next week, maybe next season, maybe in the finale. And every time, nothing. That restraint drove fans crazy, but it also made them keep watching because once you give an audience what they want, the mystery dies, but hold it just out of reach, and you've got them forever. That's exactly what happened with Matt and Kitty. Their relationship never moved past that emotional stalemate, and yet, it still managed to be one of the most intense relationships on television. Just 20 years of tension, longing, and mutual respect. Now, whether the writers planned it this way or just got lucky with the casting, it worked, and it worked because it was real. That push and pull, that closeness without clarity, it felt familiar. It mirrored relationships we've all seen in real life, and that's why fans never stopped caring. That's why, even decades later, we're still talking about what could have been, because maybe, just maybe, that unsaid love story was more powerful than any kiss could have ever been. They had the chemistry, the moments, the build-up. So why didn't it ever happen? Turns out, the real drama wasn't on screen. It was in the writer's room. Behind the scenes, creative decisions. The storyline of Gunsmoke wasn't built entirely as romance. It was a Western, through and through, law and order, right versus wrong. The slow, steady heartbeat of frontier justice. Marshal Matt Dillon wasn't just the main character, he was the moral compass. He was a lone figure in a rough world, holding the town together with nothing but his integrity and a sidearm. Producers believed that the moment you gave him a romantic storyline, especially one that was front and center, you shifted the entire foundation of the series. James Arness, the man who was Matt Dillon for 2 decades, said it best himself in an interview. He explained, "I think they felt that you could only go so far with it, and then you'd have to change the character and nature of the show." This meant that the showrunners knew that once Matt kissed Kitty, once that door was opened, the character would be different. Suddenly, the Marshal wouldn't just be the guy cleaning up Dodge. He'd be the guy with a girlfriend, maybe a family down the line, and his priorities might shift. His choices would come with personal consequences. It would no longer be about justice for the town. It'd be about protecting someone he loved. And in a show like Gunsmoke, where every decision had weight, that was a risk they weren't willing to take. From their point of view, it actually made sense. The mystery of Matt and Kitty's relationship became one of the show's strongest emotional threads. Viewers kept coming back because of the unanswered questions of which, if they resolved that tension too early or at all, the show would lose that edge. It would lose the quiet ache that made every scene between them feel so intimate, even without words. What happens when the very thing fans crave is the one thing the showrunners refuse to give? Could restraint be what made Gunsmoke unforgettable? Amanda Blake, who played Miss Kitty with grit and grace, understood this too. In interviews later on, she talked about how much she respected the strength of her character. Kitty wasn't just waiting around for Matt to fall in love with her, she was running her business, making tough choices, and holding her own in a man's world. Sure, there were tender moments, moments so sweet you could see the affection. However, Blake believed that keeping Kitty independent and not defining her by her relationship to a man was a power move. And, if we are being honest, for a woman on television in the 1950s and 60s, that was rare. She once remarked that pushing Matt and Kitty into a full-blown romance would have, in her words, softened the edges of the show. And if you look at the arc of her character, she's not wrong. Behind the scenes, the writers and producers knew exactly what they were doing. They played with the tension between Matt and Kitty like seasoned storytellers. Just enough emotion to keep the audience invested, but never crossing the line that would turn the show into something else entirely. It was all about balance. If one moment gets too romantic, Gunsmoke could have ended up as a drama with a love story. But the way they handled things helped the show stay grounded, focused, and it made those rare, vulnerable scenes between Matt and Kitty hit even harder. Also, let's not forget the era we're talking about. This was long before prestige television, long before cable networks pushed boundaries every night. In the 50s, 60s, and even into the early 70s, there were limits on how far you could take relationships on screen, especially in a family-friendly show. The network had to think about what audiences in Middle America were comfortable with. A kiss, a romance, or even a moment that suggested intimacy could send the censors into a frenzy. So even if the producers wanted to give us a real love story back then, they would have been battling a wall of red tape. In the end, what we got was something far more lasting. Though we didn't see fireworks and dramatic kisses, we saw a partnership, a quiet closeness that felt earned. Matt and Kitty weren't loud about how they felt. Of course, they didn't need to be. It was in the glances, the hesitations, the things they never said, and maybe, just maybe, that restraint is what made their relationship stand the test of time. It left us imagining what could have been, and sometimes that's more powerful than any scripted romance could ever be. But what if I told you there was in fact a kiss, and not the way anyone expected? A blink and you miss it moment, tucked away in a commercial. The almost kiss, a commercial break. Just when fans had practically given up hope, after years of watching Matt and Kitty circle each other like two stars in slow, aching orbit, something wild happened in the most unexpected place ever. In the 1950s, during the time when cigarette ads were still splashed across every radio and television screen in America, Gunsmoke stars James Arness and Amanda Blake stepped out of character just long enough to give fans a taste of the romance they'd been begging for.
Everyone wanted Matt and Miss Kitty to kiss. When actress Amanda Blake was cast on Gunsmoke, she was in her mid-20s.
And it didn't happen in some big dramatic storyline, but in a spot for L&M cigarettes. Now, for younger viewers today, this might sound wild. A cigarette commercial starring Gunsmoke characters. However, back then it wasn't unusual at all. In fact, it was totally normal for big tobacco companies to regularly sponsor television shows. And in return, cast members would show up in promotional ads, often staying in character while casually endorsing whatever brand was footing the bill. And Gunsmoke, being one of the biggest shows on air, was right in the middle of it. The ad starts off charming, lighthearted, the way these old-school commercials always did. There was that unmistakable twinkle in Kitty's eyes. Matt stood tall, cool as ever, and Miss Kitty herself is seen handing him a carton of L&M cigarettes. Then, right at the end, she leans in and plants a big kiss on his cheek. After all those years of glances, longing, and restraint of slow, simmering tension that never quite bubbled over, Miss Kitty finally kissed Matt Dillon. Yes, it was on the cheek, and not exactly what the audience wanted. Regardless, it was everything. This was a moment that lit up fan imaginations like wildfire. People who had waited patiently through season after season suddenly had this grainy, black and white treasure to hold on to. A brief, unscripted peek into the romance they'd always suspected was hiding just beneath the surface, and the fact that it happened outside the confines of Dodge, outside the world of the show, almost made it more delicious. It was like catching your favorite celebrity couple off camera, sharing a private smile you weren't supposed to see. "That's the way I like to get Ellen Ms. Folks," which was Arness's line in the commercial, became a quote that has been passed around message boards, fan pages, and Reddit threads like some kind of holy relic. This led fans to believe that maybe, just maybe, the chemistry between Matt and Kitty wasn't all acting. There was always speculation about James Arness and Amanda Blake's real-life dynamic. They worked together for 2 solid decades, and at some point, it became hard to believe their on-screen chemistry was just acting. I mean, could anyone fake that kind of connection for 2 decades without a little off-screen spark? In interviews, both stars kept things strictly professional, but the warmth between them was impossible to miss, and that commercial only made fans more convinced something real was going on. So what made the kiss so significant, even though it was just a peck on the cheek? Well, it was how casual it seemed. Blake didn't play it coy, and Arness didn't flinch. There was comfort there. One could call it familiarity. Like this wasn't the first time they'd shared that kind of closeness, but it was just the first time fans got to see it. However, the producers knew exactly what they were doing. This moment, as small as it was, scratched the itch just enough. It didn't break the narrative of the show. It didn't shift the dynamic in Dodge City, but it reminded viewers that the love story they were craving was real, even if only hinted at through a cigarette ad. In a way, it was genius marketing. You tune in every week hoping for a kiss, and the one time you get it was during the ad break. Classic television trickery. Still, for fans, that kiss lived rent-free in their minds. You have to remember this was pre-streaming, pre-binge-watching, pre-fanfiction forums. There was no instant replay, no Tumblr gift sets. You either caught that commercial live or you missed it, and if you were one of the lucky ones who saw it, you never forgot. Looking back now, it feels surreal. A romance that was so carefully guarded, so strategically restrained on screen, breaking the fourth wall just long enough to wink at the audience. As if Arness and Blake, Marshal, Dillon, and Miss Kitty knew exactly what we wanted and decided, for one fleeting moment, to give it to us. In Las Vegas, people started placing bets on whether Matt and Kitty would ever kiss on the show. Even now, decades later, people still talk about that commercial. It's a moment frozen in time, nostalgic, romantic, and oddly powerful. What if that kiss during the commercial wasn't just a fluke, but a warning? A fleeting glimpse of what the show could have become if duty hadn't always come first in Dodge. Character integrity and storytelling. As much as fans were craving that big kiss, or some kind of romantic payoff, Matt Dillon wasn't the kind of guy who could ever give in to those impulses. Not because he didn't care, but because Matt Dillon was a lawman first and everything else second. And for 20 years, James Arness played him with an unwavering sense of duty that made romance feel like a distant dream, something that would have pulled him away from his calling. From the moment Matt walked into the dusty streets of Dodge City, he was the embodiment of the Western lawman archetype. His role was simple on paper: protect the town, uphold justice, and deal with whatever the Old West threw at him. His character had no time for love, no time for personal drama, and that's where the Gunsmoke writers, along with Arness, got it right. Matt wasn't just a character. He was a symbol of unwavering justice, but he couldn't afford distractions, and that included anything that might shift the focus from the core mission of the show which was law, order, and survival in the unforgiving frontier. So, while every episode featured a little more flirting, teasing, and chemistry between Matt and Kitty, that unresolved tension was key. The moment Matt crossed that line, the show would have lost a vital piece of its foundation: consistency. Gunsmoke wasn't a romance drama, it was a show about the wild frontier, the struggle for survival, and the gray areas of morality. If at any point Matt had given in to his feelings for Kitty, the entire tone of the show could have shifted, maybe even ruined the subtle tension that kept viewers hooked for 2 decades and might even result in a drop in ratings. However, still, let's take a step back and look at a few episodes that highlight just how critical this role as a dedicated lawman was, and why their dynamic worked the way it did. For example, in the episodes where Miss Kitty faced danger, and Matt's protective side is on full display. It's not a scene of romance, but one of deep, unwavering concern. He gets in her face, ensuring she's safe. In the heat of the moment, there's a shared look, one that's full of history, affection, and the weight of all those unsaid words. It's one of those moments where you just know something is there, but Matt's duty, his role as a lawman, won't let him cross the line. Then, in the prairie, Matt has to make difficult choices as the lawman, even if it means pushing away the one person who gets him. He does what he has to do, not because he wants to, but because it's his job. Kitty's role here is equally important, though it's clear that she doesn't expect a grand declaration from Matt. She's not some damsel in distress waiting for him to rescue her. She's a woman of strength and independence, and that tension between them is not about her needing him, but about him needing to be the law, no matter the cost. Of course, the audiences ate this up. People were hooked on the push and pull, the will they won't they tension that kept Gunsmoke buzzing. Week after week, fans wrote letters, petitioning CBS, begging for some kind of resolution, but the writers knew better, and the cultural context of the 1950s and 1960s gives us a lot of insight. Television was still a relatively new medium, and society in general was much more conservative. Romance wasn't as openly explored in mainstream television the way it is now. Relationships were often portrayed in idealized, sanitized ways. But even so, the love story between Matt and Kitty couldn't be painted in those simple terms. Also add to that the fact that Gunsmoke was a Western, a genre that thrives on rugged individualism. There was a certain way of life that Matt Dillon embodied, and he couldn't just throw that all away for the sake of a happy ending. The show was about survival, struggle, and the honor of sticking to your code. And Matt's code never wavered. Let's not also forget the societal backdrop of the time. In the 1950s and 60s, the idea of a strong, silent man who could sacrifice personal desires for the greater good was a deeply resonant cultural theme and was part of why Matt Dillon resonated with so many viewers. Fans didn't just see a man struggling with his emotions, they saw him as a symbol of something larger. In a world that was already grappling with the complexities of post-war America, Matt Dillon's stoic resolve was a form of escapism that felt comfortable, reliable, and necessary. And so, as frustrating as it may have been for fans who wanted the kiss, the tension between Matt and Kitty became one of the show's most compelling features.
The chemistry between Matt and Miss Kitty was undeniable, and fans always wondered about their relationship.
It wasn't a romantic show. It was a show about duty, about doing what's right, even when it meant sacrificing personal happiness. And that was the heart of Matt Dillon. But what happens when a man built on duty forgets who he is? When the weight of honor disappears, does love finally have a chance? Or does it just rewrite the pain? The 1973 episode, A Different Love Story, We've seen Matt Dillon navigate countless dangerous situations, protect his town, and dish out justice with his iconic stoicism. But there's one episode of Gunsmoke that showed us a side of Matt we rarely got to see. His capacity for love, vulnerability, and romance, which was a moment fans had been waiting on for years. But it wasn't your typical Matt Dillon romantic storyline. No, this one had a twist. In a 1973 episode, Matt finds himself in a situation that none of us would have expected, where he gets amnesia. The lawman, who's been so rock-solid and unmoving throughout the entire series, suddenly loses his memory and ends up falling for another woman. The episode is titled The Sharecropper, and in it, Matt, now a man without his past, without the weight of his duties, falls in love with Mike Yardner, a woman who's completely out of his usual orbit. Now, you might be thinking, wait, Matt Dillon, our stoic, law-abiding hero, falling in love with someone other than Miss Kitty? What happened to Miss Kitty? And I get it. That's exactly the question fans were grappling with when this episode aired. But this is where things get interesting. This episode doesn't just give us a rare glimpse into Matt's capacity for love. It also forces us to see how his identity and his relationship with Kitty has always been deeply rooted in the man he believes himself to be. Matt's amnesia strips away everything that makes him Matt Dillon, the lawman. He's no longer the protector of Dodge City, the guy who keeps his emotions under wraps and his eyes on the mission. Without his memory, he's simply a man, navigating life just like anyone else. And without that badge weighing him down, he falls in love. It's something so unexpected, yet so human, that it's almost shocking to watch. Matt didn't just flirt or get close to Mike. He actually shares a kiss with her, marking the first and only time on Gunsmoke we see Matt Dillon engage in any kind of romantic intimacy. For a show that's built on Matt being the rock-solid, duty-bound lawman, this moment felt like a rare window into a completely different side of him. And of course, it left fans freaking out. There was the kiss, the one kiss, and then there was that feeling of, wait, what just happened? The kiss wasn't just a physical act, but it was symbolic. It was a break from the man we thought we knew. But why did the writers do this? Why did they choose this particular moment to allow Matt to experience something as raw and real as love? Well, the answer is quite simple. They knew it would humanize him. Matt had been portrayed as the perfect lawman for so long that it became almost impossible for him to show any weakness or vulnerability. He was the person you'd rely on to always get the job done. No mess, no drama, but in The Sharecropper, they gave Matt a moment to feel like everyone else, uncomplicated and unburdened by duty. They showed us what it would be like if he wasn't the Marshal, if he could just be a man, enjoying the company of someone who truly cared for him. However, Matt's love for Mike was temporary, fleeting even, because he got his memory back, and once Matt remembers who he is, once the weight of his past comes crashing back, his relationship with Mike fades away just as quickly as it began. The kiss wasn't some long-term romance or a resolution to the slow-burn tension between him and Kitty. It was a what-if moment. It was a chance for Matt to live in a different reality. A reality where his responsibilities didn't define him. And ultimately, it's a reminder that Matt Dillon could never really let go of his role as a lawman, no matter how much love or emotion he felt in the moment. The power of this episode is not just about the kiss, but about what that kiss represents. It's about showing the audience that Matt, underneath all that duty and honor, was capable of love, if only for a brief time. And in the end, the episode serves as a bittersweet reminder of how his commitment to the law will always be stronger than his desire for personal happiness. That's the essence of Matt Dillon. He might have kissed Mike Yardner, but his heart always belonged to the law, to the people of Dodge City, and to the life he'd chosen. Fans, of course, had mixed reactions to this. On the one hand, they were thrilled to see Matt's softer side and experience the romantic tension that had been building for years. It was a chance for fans to dream of what could have been between Matt and someone, anyone, just to see that he wasn't this unbreakable figure. On the other hand, it left many wondering, why not Kitty? Why couldn't they ever cross that line? And I think that's where the real magic of the show comes in. Matt Dillon wasn't meant to have a romantic conclusion. His story wasn't about finding true love. It was about his journey, his duty, and the sacrifices he made to protect the world around him. So while this kiss with Mike Yardner was a moment of rare emotional release, it also reinforced what we already knew about Matt. He wasn't made for the kind of love that made the world fade away. He was made to fight for justice, even if it meant never fully giving in to his heart's desires. In the end, that fleeting kiss was all we ever needed. It gave us a glimpse into what Matt Dillon might have been in another life, if only he hadn't been so dedicated to keeping the peace. And let's be honest, isn't that just the kind of tension that makes Gunsmoke unforgettable? For 20 years, James Arness ruled the screen as Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke, making history as the star of one of the longest-running TV shows. Do you think the show made the right choice by never letting Matt and Kitty share that long-awaited kiss? Would Gunsmoke have been even more iconic with a romantic payoff, or did the restraint make it timeless? And how do you feel about that cheek kiss in the commercial? Was it enough closure, or just more fuel for the fire? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen.